Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking on a figure so large, he didn't just shape a field, he basically created the rule book for half the disciplines we study.
It's a huge task.
A huge task. We're doing a deep dive into the sources on Aristotle. I mean, this is the polymath who essentially invented the foundations for logic, biology, ethics, politics. Things we still absolutely rely on.
It's a monumental undertaking for sure. The mission for this deep dive really is to distill the core insights from his surviving works. We want to give you a kind of fast-tracked understanding why he was just called the philosopher for centuries.
Right.
And how his frameworks, these ancient ideas, still form the backbone of modern science and how we even structure an argument.
Exactly. We're moving beyond just a history lesson here. We really want to find those aha moments, the moments where you see exactly how the structure of his mind influences how you think, how you argue, and how you categorize the world around you, even today.
Okay, so where do we start? The life seems essential.
Let's unpack the life first, because the context is everything. This was not some isolated academic in an ivory tower. This was a man whose entire life was woven into the greatest geopolitical power of his time, Macedon.
He was born in 384 BC in a town called Stagira in northern Greece. And this area had incredibly close ties to the Macedonian royals.
And his family connection is the key, right?
It's the absolute key. His father, Nicomachus, was the personal physician to King Amyntas of Macedon. You have to understand, that's not just a small detail.
So what does that connection, that royal court connection, actually mean for his intellectual development? I mean, especially with the medicine.
Well, it's crucial. It didn't just give him status. It plunged him into this culture of observation, of empirical learning that you'd find at the court. It's almost certain that this connection, his father being part of this medical guild, is what sparked Aristotle's deep early interest in biology and medicine.
And that link to Macedon, it follows him his entire life.
It's a foundational element.
Yes.
It shapes his opportunities, and in the end, it's what forces him to flee for his life.
Which sets him up perfectly for his next huge chapter. He goes to Athens and spends, nearly 2 decades at Plato's academy?
Almost 20 years. He gets there when he's about 17 or 18 and stays right up until 347 BC. And he wasn't just any student.
He must have been something special.
Oh, absolutely. The sources say that Plato himself called him the mind of the school. He was a top student, a researcher, a lecturer. He was completely immersed in that world for 2 decades. It shaped everything.
So after all that time, literally growing up intellectually in the shadow of Plato, why does he suddenly leave Athens right after Plato dies?
There are a couple of big reasons, and they probably work together. The first is philosophical.
A disagreement.
Yeah, a disagreement with the new direction of the academy. Leadership went to Plato's nephew, Speusippus, who put a huge emphasis on mathematics and, pushed Plato's forms into even more abstract territory. Aristotle was already moving in a more empirical, a more grounded direction.
And the other reason was political. It always comes back to Macedon.
Always. Philip II of Macedon was expanding his power across Greece at this time. And Athens was, let's just say, not happy about it. Anti-Macedonian sentiment was boiling over.
So it was dangerous for him.
It was becoming very dangerous for a known Macedonian ally to stay in the city. So he left for Assos, over in Asia Minor.
But he doesn't just sit around. This is where he really leans into his own research, right?
That's right. In Assos, and then on the island of Lesbos, he and his colleague Theophrastus just dove into this massive research project in botany and marine biology. This period was absolutely critical for his development as a scientist. It's where he built that observational foundation for all his later biological works.
And then comes the job he's most famous for.
Tutoring the future Alexander the Great.
An invitation from Philip II himself in 343 BC. He wants Aristotle to come back and teach his 13-year-old son.
It just confirms how important that family connection to the dynasty was. It never went away.
So what on earth do you teach the boy who's going to conquer the known world? That has to be the most high-stakes curriculum of all time.
It was incredibly intense. We know it covered ethics, politics, the classic literary texts. One of the best details is that he gave Alexander a personally annotated copy of Homer's Iliad.
Wow.
And Alexander supposedly treasured it, carried it with him on all his campaigns. The school itself was a private place called Mieza, set up just for Alexander, although some other nobles would have sat in on those lectures too.
Future generals like Ptolemy and Cassander.
Exactly. Imagine that classroom.
Now, there's a pretty heavy ethical side to this. What kind of advice does Aristotle give this future conqueror about how to rule different kinds of people?
This is where it gets really complex, and you can see the biases of the era so clearly. The sources say Aristotle encouraged the Eastern conquest, but with a very divided mindset.
How so?
He advised Alexander to be a leader to the Greeks and a despot to the barbarians.
Wow. That's blunt.
It is. It highlights this sharp ethnocentric line in his thinking. There's the Greek world, which you govern with politics and partnership, and then there's the non-Greek world, which you just control. That advice definitely gave a philosophical green light for Alexander's initial campaigns, even if Alexander himself eventually moved past it.
Okay, so Alexander takes the throne, and Aristotle eventually heads back to Athens in 335 BC. But he's still a foreigner there, a metic.
Right, which meant he couldn't legally own property. So he rented a space at the Lyceum. It was a public gymnasium and had these famous covered walkways.
A peripatos.
Exactly. And that's where his school gets its name. His followers became known as the Peripatetics, the ones who walk about.
And he spends the next 12 years there, and it's an incredibly productive time. What made the Lyceum so special?
It was basically the prototype for a modern research institute. Aristotle was so systematic, he built this huge library of manuscripts, maps, all sorts of objects for study. It was a real museum of knowledge. He ran the school, he did his own research, and he lectured to these small groups of very serious students.
Which brings us to the works themselves. This is one of the most surprising things I learned from the sources. The books we have, the physics, the metaphysics, the ethics, they were never meant for us to read.
It is absolutely critical to understand this. They were not intended for widespread publication. The majority of what survived are his esoteric works.
Meaning?
Meaning they were internal school materials, they are probably his own lecture aids, or maybe even notes taken by his students. They're dense, they're technical, they're not polished.
And all his popular stuff, the dialogues he wrote for the public, are mostly lost.
Mostly lost. We only have about a third of everything he wrote, and what we have is the technical, philosophical core. That explains why it reads like a curriculum. Because it was a curriculum.
Now, despite that close relationship early on, Aristotle and his former student, Alexander, they grow apart. What was the final break?
Their views just diverged too dramatically on how the empire should be run. Aristotle's very Greek-centric advice really clashed with Alexander's growing desire to, integrate Persian culture and people into his administration.
Alexander became more cosmopolitan than his teacher.
Much more. They also disagreed on how to govern city-states, even on philosophical ideas about virtue. Alexander's path just grew far beyond what Aristotle had advised.
And then when Alexander dies suddenly in 323 BC, it's like history repeating itself for Aristotle in Athens.
The anti-Macedonian backlash was immediate and violent. A charge of impiety was trumped up against him, just like with Socrates.
So he had to flee?
He fled to his mother's family estate in Chalcis. And that's where he delivered that incredible line, referencing Socrates' execution. "I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy."
He died there a little later of natural causes. But the story of what happened to his writings, it's a miracle they even exist.
It really is. He left his works to his successor, Theophrastus. From there, they were passed down, and at one point, according to the story, they were hidden in a damp cellar to protect them.
Yeah.
For a long, long time. They weren't properly compiled, edited, and published into the cohesive books we know today until the 1st century BC by a scholar named Andronicus of Rhodes. That's almost 300 years after Aristotle died. An unbelievable journey.
A miracle that those lecture notes survived. And what survived became the blueprint for, well, almost everything. So let's shift from the life to the philosophy itself, starting with the very rules of how to think.
He is credited with the first systematic study of logic. It's almost impossible to overstate how influential this was. His system was the system of logic in the West right up until the 19th century.
The sources mention that 2,000 years later, Immanuel Kant basically said that logic was a completed science with Aristotle, as in he'd finished it. That's a staggering claim.
It just shows you how perfect and exhaustive his system was considered to be. The collection of his logical works is called the Organon.
Which means the tool.
Exactly. The name was given later, but it's perfect. Logic is the tool you use to analyze everything else. And the 6 books of the Organon lay out the entire process, from the simplest building blocks all the way up to complex arguments.
Okay, so walk us through that structure. It's like building a disciplined mind from the ground up. Where does it start?
It starts with the absolute basics in the categories. This deals with simple terms, things like substance, quantity, quality, the fundamental ways you can describe something.
And then?
Then comes on interpretation, which is about how you combine those terms into propositions into statements that can be true or false, and how those statements relate to each other, like through contradiction.
And from there, we get to the real engine of the whole system.
The core method.
Right.
That's in the prior analytics, which is all about the syllogism, the structure of argument itself, and then the posterior analytics, which is about demonstration, about what counts as real, solid knowledge.
And the last couple of books are about applying these rules in the real world, in debates.
Precisely. The topics is about dialectics, how to have a rigorous debate. And On Sophistical Refutations is basically a field guide to spotting and dismantling bad arguments.
And I mentioned an important distinction. Aristotle didn't call his formal system logic.
No, he reserved the word logic for the broader practice of dialectic or debate. He called his rigorous, formal method analytics. That shows you how focused he was on the scientific precision of deduction.
And the heart of that method, the thing that defined logic for centuries, is the syllogism. Let's break that down, because it's really the DNA of deductive reasoning.
A syllogism is a logical argument where you take two statements or premises that you accept as true, and you use them to reach a conclusion that is necessarily true. It has three terms: a major term, a minor term, and a middle term that links them.
Give us the classic example.
The classic one, Barbara, goes like this. Premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, all Greeks are men.
Conclusion.
Therefore, all Greeks are mortal. The power of it is that if your two premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. It's inescapable.
That structure is the bedrock of so much formal reasoning. But he went beyond just making correct arguments. He wanted to know what makes knowledge real.
Yes, that's what demonstration is all about in the posterior analytics. For Aristotle, demonstration isn't just showing that something is true, it's showing why it must be true. It means you understand its underlying causes.
So once he's established the rules for argument, he turns to the rules for, well, existence itself, the field we call metaphysics.
Right, but he didn't call it that. That name came later from a librarian who just shelved those books, Metaphysica, after the physics.
So what did he call it?
He called it first philosophy, or sometimes theology, and he defined it as the study of being qua being.
Meaning
The study of existence just as existence. It asks the most fundamental questions. What does it mean for something to be? This branch of philosophy looks at what is eternal, unchanging, and not made of matter.
And the fundamental building block of his reality is the idea of substance, or ousia.
Yes, and his theory of substance is revolutionary. He says that any particular thing, this table, that tree, isn't just one thing. It's a combination of two things, matter and form. And this theory is called hylomorphism.
Hylomorphism, from the Greek for matter and form.
Exactly. The matter is the physical stuff, the raw material, the potential. The form is the blueprint, the essence, the actuality. It's the definition of what the thing is.
Let's use the house example to make that concrete.
Okay, a house. The matter is the bricks, the wood, the stones, all the physical stuff that is potentially a house. The form is the design, the arrangement, the definition. A shelter for people and property. It's not material. The form is what makes that pile of bricks an actual house.
And you can't have one without the other.
In a physical object, no. The form is inseparable from the matter. It's what gives the matter its structure and its purpose.
And this is the great philosophical divorce from his teacher, Plato. You see it on that famous painting, The School of Athens. Plato pointing up, Aristotle gesturing down.
That fresco captures it perfectly. They were both searching for universals concepts like justice or beauty or, appleness.
But they looked in completely different places.
For Plato, the forms were more real than actual objects. They existed in a separate, heavenly realm of pure ideas. So he points up.
But Aristotle yanks it all back down to earth.
He was a moderate realist. He argued that universals are real, but they only exist when they're instantiated in a particular thing. The form of apple exists inside every single apple. It doesn't float around in some other dimension. That's why he gestures down. Knowledge comes from observing the particulars right here in the world.
That one image really shows the split between idealism and the kind of empiricism that leads to science.
It's a fundamental split we're still dealing with today.
So if a substance is a combination of form and matter, how does he explain change? How does an acorn become an oak tree?
He does it with two brilliant concepts: potentiality, or dynamis, and actuality, or entelecheia. He starts by breaking down the different kinds of change. There's growth, there's moving from one place to another, there's changing quality, and then there's coming into being, or generation.
Okay, so how do potentiality and actuality drive that process?
Potentiality is what something is capable of becoming, if the conditions are right. An acorn is potentially an oak tree. A block of marble is potentially a statue. This could be an innate potential, like an eye having the ability to see, or a learned one like knowing how to play the flute.
And actuality is the end result, the fulfillment of that potential.
Exactly. It's the finished state,
Mhm.
which is also the thing's purpose, or telos. But here's the crucial part, and it seems a little backward at first. Aristotle argues that actuality is prior to potentiality.
How can the finished thing come before the potential?
It's prior in logic, not necessarily in time. The end goal, the actuality, is what defines the potential in the first place. His famous line is, "Animals do not see in order that they may have sight, but they have sight that they may see."
Ah, so the act of seeing is the purpose that defines the potential of the eye.
Precisely. The activity, the actuality, defines the potential. The final form of the house is what gives the pile of timber its potentiality as building material. It's an incredibly elegant way to explain change while keeping the form central.
That's a perfect transition point from his abstract philosophy to his work on the physical world. This is where logic becomes physics.
Yes, his natural philosophy. This was a huge category for him. It covered everything we have to now call physics, biology, all the natural sciences. He saw it as a theoretical science knowledge for its own sake.
And he starts with the basic building blocks of the world. He takes the four elements from Empedocles: earth, water, air, and fire.
But he systemizes them. He links them to qualities.
Huh.
Hot, cold, wet, dry. So earth is cold and dry, fire is hot and dry, and so on.
Yeah.
That covered the terrestrial world. But his big addition was a fifth element,
Ether.
aether, the divine, perfect, unchanging substance of the heavens. The stars, the planets, they were all made of aether.
And this elemental theory directly leads to his theory of motion.
It does. He proposed two kinds of motion, natural and violent. Natural motion is just each element trying to get back to its proper place.
So rocks fall and smoke rises.
Right. Earth and water move down toward the center of the universe, fire and air move up, and aether, being perfect, moves in a perfect circle. That's why the planets circle the Earth in his model.
And violent motion.
That's any motion caused by an outside force, pushing a cart, throwing a stone. The key idea here, which is very different from our modern view, is that the natural state of an object is to be at rest.
So motion stops the second you stop pushing.
Exactly. Which created a problem. How does a thrown spear keep flying after it leaves your hand? He had to come up with this slightly awkward idea that the air was rushing around behind it and pushing it along.
That's a theory that was challenged later on, but his theory on falling objects is probably his most famous mistake.
Right, the one Galileo supposedly disproved from the Tower of Pisa. Aristotle stated a quantitative law, that the speed of a falling object is proportional to its weight and inversely proportional to the density of the medium it's falling through.
Okay, so a heavier object falls faster, and this led him to his conclusion about the vacuum.
The vacuum deduction, yes. He reasoned that if his law was true, an object falling in a vacuum where the density is zero would have to move at an infinite speed, which is an absurdity.
Therefore, a vacuum is impossible.
Right. Horror vacui. Now, of course, we know that in a vacuum, a feather and a cannonball fall at the same rate. But here's the modern, more charitable take.
There's a nuance here.
There is. Some physicists argue that Aristotle's model is actually a pretty good description for the specific domain he was observing. Objects falling through a fluid, like air or water. In that context, where you have air resistance, a heavier object does fall faster than a lighter one of the same shape.
So it wasn't wrong, it was just incomplete, a model with a limited application.
Exactly. It was based on careful observation of the world as he could see it.
But the ultimate framework for explaining anything and everything in his system is the four causes.
The four atia, the four fundamental explanations for why something is the way it is. If you want a complete explanation, you have to answer all four.
Okay, let's list them.
1, the material cause. What is it made of? For a bronze statue, it's the bronze. 2, the formal cause. What is its form or design? The blueprint of the statue.
3,
The efficient cause. Who or what made it? The sculptor. And 4, and this is the most important for Aristotle, the final cause. The telos. What is its purpose? Why was it made? To honor a hero. To be beautiful.
This framework is just everywhere in his thought. It applies to everything from a statue to a living creature.
And it leads directly into his empirical work. He was a true pioneer in geology, for example. He recognized that the Earth changes on a scale far beyond a human lifetime.
What kind of evidence did he use for that?
He pointed to things like lakes that had dried up over generations, or deserts that were being watered by shifting rivers. He even noted the upheaval of islands before a volcanic eruption. And he made this incredibly sharp observation about desalination, that evaporated seawater becomes fresh water. He understood the basics of the hydrologic cycle.
But his real legacy as a scientist is in biology. I
Mhm.
mean, he's called the father of zoology, the father of embryology.
He was the first person to study biology systematically, classifying, observing, dissecting. A lot of his best work came from his time on Lesbos, where he was just immersed in studying marine life with Theophrastus. His zoological writings are just packed with incredible detail.
Detail that was so good it was sometimes disbelieved for centuries.
Absolutely. He accurately described the four-chambered stomachs of ruminants. He detailed the oviviparous development of the hound shark, where the eggs hatch inside the mother. That's a very sophisticated observation for the time.
But the best story is the octopus.
The octopus arm, yes. He gave this perfectly accurate description of the hectocaudal arm, which is a specialized arm the male octopus uses to transfer sperm. And for centuries, people thought he was just making it up. It sounded too weird.
Until the 19th century, when biologists confirmed he was exactly right.
It's the perfect example. His observations were sometimes too advanced for his time. He was seeing things that theory couldn't yet explain.
And he wasn't just a passive observer. He did investigations.
He wasn't doing controlled experiments in the modern sense, but he was definitely investigating. He famously describes opening a fertilized hen's egg at different stages to watch the embryo's heart start beating. His method was always to gather massive amounts of data and then infer general principles from it.
Which is the scientific method in a nutshell.
It is. And he used that data to create his great classification system, the Scala Naturae.
The scale of nature. This is his hierarchy of life, right?
Yes, he arranged about 500 species on this graded scale, from plants at the bottom up through various animals to man at the very top. He made big divisions, like animals with blood for vertebrates and animals without blood for invertebrates.
But what makes him such a good scientist is that he wasn't a dogmatist about his own system.
That's the key. He meticulously recorded the exceptions, the things that didn't neatly fit.
Yeah.
For example, he noted that some sharks have a kind of placenta which seemed to violate his neat categories, but he wrote it down anyway because that's what he observed. The data always came first.
So from the outer world of animals, he moves to the inner world of the mind, to psychology and the soul.
Yes, in his book on the soul. And again, he uses his hylomorphism. The soul isn't some ghost living inside the body. It's the form of a living being. It's the principle of life that makes the body actually alive and able to move.
And he proposed 3 types of soul.
A nested hierarchy. First, the vegetative soul. This is about basic life functions. Growth, nutrition, plants have this. Then the sensitive soul, which adds sensation and movement. Animals have this.
And finally, the human soul.
The rational soul. This is unique to humans. It's what gives us intellect, nous, and reason, logos. The ability to grasp the forms of things without their matter and to think abstractly.
Where did he think this rational soul was located?
This is one of his ideas that seems strange to us. He put it in the heart. He saw the heart as the central vital organ, the source of the body's heat and life. Sensation happened in the sense organs, but he believed thought was centered in the heart.
He also had some profound insights into how thought actually works, especially memory.
His theory of memory is incredibly modern. He said memory is holding on to a mental image, a phantasm, and recognizing it as something from the past. But recollection, pulling up a memory, isn't random. It works by the laws of association.
Similarity, contrast, and contiguity.
Exactly. You think of a friend, and that reminds you of another friend who looks similar. You think of hot, it makes you think of cold. You think of a place, and that reminds you of what happened there. He understood that our thoughts are linked in a chain. That's foundational to psychology.
And he even had a theory of dreams that was surprisingly scientific for his time.
He totally stripped them of any divine meaning. He rejected the idea that they predict the future.
So what are they?
He argued that during sleep, our senses are quiet, but the leftover impressions from the day are still lingering in our minds. And because there are no new distractions, we notice these faint echoes, and that's what dreams are. If one happens to match a future event, he said, it's just a coincidence.
Okay, so we have the rules for argument, for existence, and for the entire physical world. Now we move to the big practical question. How should we live?
This is practical philosophy.
Yeah.
And for Aristotle, ethics is a practical science. The point isn't just to know what is good. The point is to become good and to do good.
And it all starts with his concept of a proper function, an ergon.
That's the core of his Nicomachean ethics. The function of an eye is to see. The function of a flute is to be played well. So what is the unique function of a human being? The activity of the soul in accordance with reason. So human excellence, human flourishing, is achieved by using our reason in the best possible way.
Which leads to the ultimate goal of all human action, eudaimonia. We translate it as happiness, but that doesn't quite capture it.
No, happiness makes it sound like a fleeting emotion. Eudaimonia is more like flourishing or living well and doing well. It's an objective state you achieve over a whole lifetime. And to get there, you need good character or moral virtue.
And this is where we get his most famous ethical idea, the virtuous mean, the golden mean.
Yes. Virtue is not an extreme. It's a perfect balance between two vices, a vice of excess and a vice of deficiency. And you find this mean through practice, through habit.
Let's use the classic example of courage.
Okay, courage is the virtuous mean. What's the deficiency? Cowardice? Too little bravery? What's the excess?
Rashness, too much bravery to the point of being reckless.
Exactly. Or think about generosity. The deficiency is stinginess. The excess is being wasteful. The virtue is finding that sweet spot in the middle. It's about feeling the right way at the right time for the right reason. And that takes practical wisdom.
So being a good person isn't about memorizing rules. It's about developing a good character, like an athlete training their body.
It's a disposition, a state of character that you build through constant practice and making good choices.
And that individual ethical project can't happen in a vacuum. It leads directly to his politics.
It has to, because for Aristotle, you can't live a good life by yourself. He saw the city, the polis, as a natural community. He had this organic view where the city is more fundamental than the family, and the family is more fundamental than the individual.
For the whole must of necessity be prior to the part.
Right, which leads to his most famous political statement. Man is by nature a political animal.
What does he mean by that? We're not just social like ants or bees.
No, it's our rationality, our logos. We have language, which allows us to discuss ideas like justice and goodness. And the polis is the place where that rational capacity can be fully expressed. Living in a state governed by shared laws and discourse is what makes us fully human.
So what's the purpose of the city? Is it just for defense or for trade?
This is his most profound political idea. The purpose of the state is not just survival or economic stability. The telos of the city is for the sake of noble actions. The state exists to make it possible for citizens to achieve eudaimonia, to live a virtuous life.
That's a much higher bar than most modern political theories set.
Much higher. It's not just about protecting us from harm, it's about helping us flourish.
And like with ethics, he was wary of extremes in government. He didn't like pure democracy.
He thought pure democracy could easily become mob rule, just like pure oligarchy was just rule by the rich for the rich. He was searching for a stable system.
And his solution was a mixed state.
A mixed constitution, or politia. It tries to blend the best elements of different systems to balance them out. So, you might take a feature from oligarchy, like electing the most qualified people to office, and blend it with a feature from democracy, like having no property requirement to be on the council. It's about mixing principles to serve the common good.
He also laid some of the groundwork for economics. He had a lot to say about private property.
He did, and he was a big defender of it. Unlike Plato, who wanted a guardian class with no private property, Aristotle made a very practical argument.
Which was?
He said the problems we blame on property, like greed, don't come from property itself. They come from human nature. And he argued that people take better care of what they own personally, and that ownership actually allows for virtues like generosity. You can't be generous with something that isn't yours to give.
He also had a theory about where money came from.
He saw it as a tool that arose out of pure convenience for trade. When people needed to import and export things, barter became too clumsy, so they agreed on a common medium, like iron or silver, that was easy to measure and carry.
But he had a really low opinion of making money just for the sake of making money.
A very low opinion. He was deeply critical of retail and profit-seeking. He saw it as unnatural. And he especially condemned charging interest or usury.
Why was that so bad in his view?
Because it was making money from money itself. He saw money as barren. Its purpose was to facilitate exchange, not to breed more money. This view had a massive influence on religious prohibitions against usury for centuries.
And yet, for all his criticism, he understood the functions of money incredibly well.
He really did. He gave this brilliant summary. He said it serves as a universal standard of measurement, making different things commensurable. And he said it acts as a sort of security for future exchange, a very sophisticated analysis.
The breadth is just staggering. From politics and economics, he then moves on to the arts of persuasion and poetry.
His rhetoric is still the foundational text. It's a systematic guide to persuasion that is still taught everywhere. He says there are three fundamental appeals a speaker must use.
Ethos, pathos, and logos.
Ethos, the appeal to your own character and credibility. Pathos, the appeal to the audience's emotions. And logos, the appeal to logical reasoning.
We use those terms all the time when we talk about speeches or ads. We're speaking Aristotle's language.
We are. He also broke down the different kinds of speeches, ceremonial, legal, political, and the different kinds of proofs you could use. It was a complete system.
And then in his Poetics, he does the same thing for drama. It all starts with one concept: mimesis.
Mimesis, or imitation. He saw all art, poetry, tragedy, comedy, music, as fundamentally an imitation of life and action. He thought it was a natural human instinct to imitate and to enjoy imitations.
And his analysis of tragedy became the blueprint for Western drama.
He defined tragedy as an imitation of a serious action that arouses pity and fear in the audience in order to achieve catharsis.
A purging or cleansing of those emotions.
Exactly. By watching a good person suffer due to some fatal flaw, we experience those powerful emotions in a safe, controlled way and come out cleansed. He held up Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannus as the perfect example of tragedy.
And in his typical fashion, he even argued that tragedy was a superior art form to epic poetry.
He did. He said it has everything an epic has, plus it has music and spectacle, it's more unified, and it achieves its goal of catharsis in a much more direct and concentrated way.
It's just mind-boggling that a single person could lay the foundations for so many fields. So let's wrap up by looking at his legacy. How was all this received, and where do we still feel his influence?
Well, the titles he's been given tell the story. The first scientist, the father of logic, biology, political science, zoology, rhetoric. The list is just enormous.
And his influence wasn't just in Europe, it was global, shaping three major intellectual traditions at once during the medieval period.
Absolutely. In the Islamic world, he was known as the first teacher. During the European Dark Ages, it was Islamic scholars who preserved, translated, and studied his work. Thinkers like Avicenna and Averroes used his logic to build their own systems of philosophy and theology.
And it was the same in medieval Judaism.
Yes, the great scholar Maimonides based his work on Aristotelian logic. He called Aristotle the chief of the philosophers and said his intellect represented the absolute peak of what a human mind could achieve.
Then, when his works were reintroduced to Western Europe, he became the central figure of scholasticism.
He was just called the philosopher, as in the only one you needed to reference. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas built their entire theological systems on his philosophical foundation. The poet Dante called him the master of those who know. For over 1,000 years, he was the unquestioned authority.
But science moves on. The very spirit of inquiry that he championed meant that his own conclusions would eventually have to be challenged.
And the critique started pretty early. In late antiquity, a scholar named John Philoponus questioned his physics, especially the idea that a vacuum was impossible. He introduced the theory of impetus, the idea that a force is imparted into a thrown object.
Which is a much better explanation for why a spear keeps flying.
A much better one. Then, during the Renaissance, the new scientific method began to systematically replace Aristotle's models.
You have people like William Harvey.
Right. William Harvey demonstrated that blood circulates in a closed system with the heart acting as a pump. This completely contradicted Aristotle's view of the heart as the seat of the soul where blood was made and consumed.
And of course, Galileo and the falling bodies.
Galileo challenged the idea that heavier objects fall faster. But as we said, even there, Aristotle's model was a pretty good description of what you actually see in the real world with air resistance.
What about his logic? That held on for a very long time.
Until the 19th century, with George Boole. Boole had immense respect for Aristotle's logic, but he wanted to go under, over, and beyond it by creating a mathematical, symbolic logic. That was the next great leap.
But in biology, even today, his reputation is incredible. Charles Darwin paid him the ultimate compliment.
He did. Darwin said that the great biologists Linnaeus and Cuvier were mere schoolboys to old Aristotle. That's just a stunning endorsement from the founder of modern biology.
And you can still see his frameworks in use.
Absolutely. The modern study of animal behavior uses Nico Tinbergen's 4 questions about function, evolution, mechanism, and development. That framework is based directly on Aristotle's 4 causes. The structure of his thought is still with us.
Which brings us back to that painting, The School of Athens. It's such a perfect visual summary.
It really is. Plato, the idealist, pointing to the heavens, and Aristotle, the empiricist, hand held down, gesturing to the earth, acknowledging that knowledge begins here. with a systematic observation of the world in front of us.
So after all of this, what does it really mean for you, the listener, today?
I think Aristotle's real achievement isn't any single discovery. It's the conceptual architecture he built. The logic, the framework of causality, the categories. These were the tools that allowed science and philosophy to develop for the next 2,000 years. His influence is this invisible structure under almost all of Western thought.
So when you make an argument with a premise and a conclusion, or you analyze a speech using ethos, pathos, and logos, or you ask what the ultimate purpose of something is.
You're using an Aristotelian framework. His legacy isn't really about his answers, many of which have been corrected. It's about the powerful, systematic questions he taught us all how to ask.
He gave us the toolbox.
He gave us the toolbox, and he linked it all to this idea of eudaimonia, a flourishing life, which could only be achieved in a state that aimed for something higher than just survival.
And that leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to consider. Aristotle believed that the city, the polis, exists not for mere survival, but for the sake of noble actions.
So, if you were to apply that idea, his concept of the final cause, to our modern political and economic systems, what would their telos be? What is their true ultimate purpose?
And more importantly, how close are they to achieving it? That is a deep dive for another time.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.